I was standing in my driveway in Mesa, Arizona, staring at the empty spot where my brand new portable generator had been sitting just 8 hours earlier. And the only thought running through my mind was that someone had actually had the audacity to steal a $2,000 piece of equipment right off my property. My name is Trevor Caldwell, and I had lived in the Sunset Ridge HOA community for about 3 years. It was one of those cookie-cutter neighborhoods where every house looked vaguely similar. The lawns had to be maintained to exact specifications, and the homeowners association seemed to have an opinion about everything from your mailbox color to how many seconds your Christmas lights could stay up past New Year's Day. I had bought the generator 2 weeks ago after a particularly bad monsoon season had knocked out power to our neighborhood for almost 4 days straight. My wife Sarah had been 8 months pregnant at the time, and sitting in a house with no air conditioning in Arizona summer heat was not something I wanted to experience again. The generator was a Honda EU 7000 IS, one of those high-end inverter models that could power basically my entire house if needed. It was also equipped with a GPS tracker that I had installed myself, something I did with all my expensive equipment after my truck had been broken into the previous year. I had learned my lesson about securing valuable items, though apparently not well enough since I had left the generator on the side of my house instead of in my locked shed. I pulled out my phone and opened the tracking app, my hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline and anger pumping through my system. The little blue dot that represented my generator was blinking steadily, and when I zoomed out on the map, I saw that it was less than half a mile away. My first instinct was to jump in my truck and go retrieve it myself, but Sarah came out onto the driveway and immediately read my expression. "What happened?" she asked, holding our 3-month-old daughter Emma against her shoulder. "Someone stole the generator," I said, my jaw clenched. "I can see exactly where it is on the tracker." "Trevor, call the police," Sarah said firmly. "Do not go over there yourself. You don't know who took it or what they might do if you confront them." She was right, of course. I dialed the non-emergency number for the Mesa Police Department and explained the situation. The dispatcher told me an officer would be out within the hour to take a report and potentially accompany me to recover the stolen property. I gave them the address where the tracker was showing the generator's location, and the dispatcher paused for a moment. "Sir, can you confirm that address again?" she asked. I repeated it, reading directly from my phone screen. "Okay, we'll have an officer out shortly," she said, her tone slightly odd, though I could not quite place why. Officer Martinez arrived 45 minutes later, a veteran cop who looked like he had seen just about everything Mesa had to offer. I showed him the tracking app on my phone, and he nodded, taking down all the information about the generator, including the serial number and photos I had stored on my phone. "So the tracker shows it at 2847 Desert Bloom Court?" he asked, looking at his own phone. "Yes, sir," I confirmed. "It's been there since sometime between midnight and 7 this morning when I discovered it missing." "That's interesting," Officer Martinez said, scratching his chin. "Do you know who lives at that address?" "No idea," I said. "Should I? That's the home of Richard Pemberton," he said. "He's the president of your HOA." My stomach dropped. Richard Pemberton was a 53-year-old real estate agent who had been the HOA president for the past 5 years. He was one of those guys who seemed to take personal pleasure in enforcing every single rule in the association's handbook, no matter how petty. I had received 3 violation notices from him in the past year alone, one for having my trash cans visible from the street on a non-collection day, one for a small oil stain on my driveway that I had not cleaned up fast enough, and one for having a garden hose that was not properly coiled and stored. Each violation came with a fine, and each fine felt like Richard was personally reaching into my wallet just because he could. "You're kidding me," I said, feeling the anger building again. "The HOA president stole my generator." "We don't know that for certain yet," Officer Martinez said, though his expression suggested he found the situation highly suspicious. "Let me call for backup, and we'll go have a conversation with Mr. Pemberton." 20 minutes later, I was sitting in the passenger seat of Officer Martinez's patrol car as we drove through the neighborhood toward Richard's house. A second patrol car with Officer Chen followed behind us. The morning sun was already brutal, and I could feel sweat forming on my back despite the air conditioning blasting in the vehicle. Richard's house was one of the larger models in the neighborhood, a two-story with an extended garage, and what I knew from community gossip was a fully finished basement. His yard was immaculate, of course, with precisely trimmed hedges and a lawn that looked like it belonged on a golf course. His black Mercedes SUV sat in the driveway, and I noticed the garage door was closed. Officer Martinez rang the doorbell, and we waited. I stayed slightly behind him, my phone still showing the tracker location. The blue dot was definitely here, probably in that closed garage based on the GPS coordinates. The door opened, and Richard Pemberton appeared wearing khaki shorts and a polo shirt that probably cost more than my entire outfit. He was balding, with what remained of his hair cut short and graying at the temples. His face had that perpetual slight tan that came from spending time on golf courses, and he wore wire-rimmed glasses that he immediately pushed up his nose when he saw the police officers. "Officers, how can I help you?" he asked, his voice smooth and controlled. He glanced past them and spotted me, and something flickered across his face before he regained his composure. "Mr. Pemberton, I'm Officer Martinez with Mesa PD. We're investigating a theft that occurred sometime last night in the neighborhood. A portable generator was stolen from Mr. Caldwell's property." He gestured back at me. "Oh, that's terrible," Richard said, not missing a beat. "I haven't seen anything unusual, but I'll certainly keep an eye out." "Was it expensive?" "About $2,000, Officer Martinez said. "The interesting thing is, Mr. Caldwell had a GPS tracker installed on the generator, and it's currently showing a location at this address." Richard's face went slightly pale, but he recovered quickly. "That must be some kind of mistake. I certainly don't have anyone's generator. Those GPS things aren't always accurate, are they?" "They're usually accurate to within a few feet," Officer Martinez said calmly. "Would you mind if we took a look in your garage, just to clear this up?" "Actually, I do mind," Richard said, crossing his arms. "I know my rights. You need a warrant to search my property." "That's true," Officer Martinez acknowledged, "but it would certainly be easier and faster if you just let us take a quick look. If the generator's not there, we'll apologize for the inconvenience and continue our investigation elsewhere." "I'm not letting you search my property without a warrant," Richard said firmly. "I'm within my rights to refuse, and I'm exercising that right. I'm sorry about Trevor's generator, but I had nothing to do with it." Officer Chen stepped forward. "Mr. Pemberton, refusing to cooperate in a theft investigation when we have evidence suggesting the stolen property is on your premises doesn't look good. It would really be in your best interest to let us take a quick look." "Get a warrant," Richard said, and started to close the door. "We'll do that," Officer Martinez said. "Please don't leave the property or remove anything from your garage in the meantime. That could be considered tampering with evidence." Richard shut the door without another word, and I heard the deadbolt slide into place. "Can he really just refuse like that?" I asked as we walked back to the patrol car. Absolutely, Officer Martinez said. Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable searches. But the good news is, with the GPS evidence and the circumstances, we should be able to get a warrant pretty quickly. Judge Morrison is on duty today, and he's usually pretty responsive to these kinds of situations. We drove back to my house, and Officer Martinez made several phone calls while sitting in my driveway. I went inside and explained the situation to Sarah, who looked both shocked and unsurprised at the same time. "Richard Pemberton," she said. "That actually makes a twisted kind of sense. He's always struck me as someone who thinks the rules don't apply to him, even though he's happy to enforce them on everyone else." "The police are getting a warrant," I said, pacing around our living room. "This is insane. Why would he steal my generator? He's a real estate agent. It's not like he can't afford to buy his own." "Maybe that's exactly why," Sarah said thoughtfully. "Guys like that often have money problems they don't want anyone to know about. All that expensive stuff, the Mercedes, the perfect lawn, the designer clothes. Maybe it's all financed to the hilt." Officer Martinez knocked on my door about 90 minutes later, and he was holding a piece of paper when I opened it. "Got the warrant," he said with a slight smile. Judge Morrison agreed that the GPS evidence combined with Mr. Pemberton's refusal to cooperate constituted probable cause. "Let's go see what's in that garage." This time when we arrived at Richard's house, there were 3 patrol cars present. Officer Martinez rang the doorbell again, and we waited. When Richard opened the door this time, his expression was much less confident. "Mr. Pemberton, we have a warrant to search your garage and any other areas of your property where the stolen generator might reasonably be located," Officer Martinez said, handing him the document. Richard took the warrant and read through it, his face getting progressively redder. "This is harassment," he said. "I'm going to file a complaint about this." "That's your right," Officer Martinez said. "Now, please open your garage door." "My attorney will hear about this," Richard muttered, but he grabbed his keys from a hook near the door and walked toward the garage. We followed him, and he pressed the button on his key fob. The garage door began to roll up with a mechanical whine. There, sitting in the middle of an otherwise organized garage, was my Honda generator. It still had the small scratch on the side panel where I had accidentally bumped it against my shed door, and the distinctive yellow tag I had attached with my name and phone number was clearly visible. "That's it," I said immediately, pointing. "That's my generator." Officer Martinez walked into the garage and examined the machine, then looked at Richard. "Mr. Pemberton, do you have a receipt or any proof of ownership for this generator?" "I bought it second-hand," Richard said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I can't remember where." "It has Mr. Caldwell's name on it," Officer Chen pointed out, indicating the tag. "Anyone could write a name on a tag," Richard said desperately. "Maybe he's trying to steal my generator by claiming it's his." "The serial number on the generator matches the serial number Mr. Caldwell provided in his initial report," Officer Martinez said, consulting his notes. "Mr. Pemberton, I'm placing you under arrest for theft. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." Richard's face went from red to white. "Wait, you're arresting me? This is ridiculous. I'm the president of this HOA. I have standing in this community. There must be some misunderstanding." "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," Officer Martinez said, pulling out his handcuffs. "This is going to ruin me," Richard said, and for the first time he sounded genuinely distressed rather than indignant. "My reputation, my business, everything. You should have thought about that before you stole someone's property," Officer Chen said, not unkindly but without sympathy. They cuffed Richard and placed him in the back of one of the patrol cars. His wife, Patricia, had appeared at some point during the arrest, standing in the doorway with her hand over her mouth, looking horrified. She was a thin woman with highlighted blonde hair and too much makeup, wearing expensive workout clothes despite the fact that I had never seen her actually exercise. "What's happening?" she called out. "Richard, what did you do?" "Call Stephen," Richard shouted back to her, referring to his attorney. "Call Stephen right now. Officer Martinez authorized me to take my generator back, and another officer helped me load it into the bed of my truck. I secured it with straps, making sure it would not move during the drive back to my house. The whole situation felt surreal, like I was watching it happen to someone else rather than actually participating in it." "What happens next?" I asked Officer Martinez. "He'll be booked at the station, and there will be an arraignment probably within 48 hours, he explained. "The prosecutor will decide what charges to file. Given the value of the generator, it's likely to be felony theft, which is a Class 5 felony in Arizona for property valued over $1,000. You'll probably be contacted to give a formal statement, and you might need to testify if this goes to trial, though most of these cases end up with a plea deal." "A felony charge," I said, letting that sink in. "For a guy who spent the last 3 years nitpicking everyone else's rule violations." "The irony isn't lost on me," Officer Martinez said with a wry smile. "Make sure you keep all your documentation about the generator, the receipt, the serial numbers, everything. And keep that tracking app data saved. That was smart thinking, installing that tracker." I drove home slowly, my mind racing through everything that had just happened. The neighborhood grapevine worked fast, and by the time I pulled into my driveway, I had already received 3 text messages from neighbors asking if it was true that Richard Pemberton had been arrested. I did not respond to any of them yet. I just wanted to get my generator safely stored and process what had happened. Sarah met me outside, and I filled her in on every detail while we moved the generator into our locked shed this time. Emma was napping, and the house was quiet as we sat at the kitchen table. "I still don't understand why he did it," I said. "Why would someone in his position risk everything for a generator? People do stupid things," Sarah said. "Maybe he thought you'd never figure out it was him. Or maybe he has gambling debts or something else we don't know about. Either way, he made a choice, and now he has to face the consequences." The next few days were chaotic. The story spread through the neighborhood like wildfire, and I became a minor celebrity among people who had also received violation notices from Richard over the years. Several neighbors reached out to share their own stories of what they considered harassment or overreach by the HOA president. One guy, Martin, told me that Richard had fined him $300 for having a basketball hoop that was 6 inches too close to the street, according to the HOA rules. Another woman, Jennifer, said Richard had threatened to put a lien on her house over unpaid fines for having decorative rocks in her front yard that were supposedly not the approved type. I received a call from Detective Sarah Kowalski from the Mesa Police Department's Property Crimes Division. She asked me to come down to the station to give a formal statement, which I did the following Tuesday morning. The statement took about an hour, during which I went through every detail of discovering the theft, checking the tracker, and working with the officers to recover my property. "Mr. Pemberton is claiming this was all a misunderstanding," Detective Kowalski told me. "He's now saying that he saw the generator sitting on the side of your house and thought it had been abandoned or was trash, so he took it thinking he could use it." I almost laughed. "It's a $2,000 generator that was maybe 2 weeks old. In what world does that look like trash?" I agree. His story doesn't hold up to scrutiny. she said. "Especially since your name tag was clearly visible on it. The prosecutor is moving forward with charges." Given Mr. Pemberton's position in the community and the clear evidence, they want to make sure this is handled properly. The arraignment happened on a Thursday afternoon. I was not required to be there, but I decided to go anyway. The courthouse in Mesa was busy, with multiple cases being heard that day. I sat in the gallery and watched as Richard was brought in, wearing a suit this time instead of the casual clothes from the day of his arrest. His attorney, Stephen Hirsch, was a well-known criminal defense lawyer in the area, the kind who advertised on billboards. The judge, a stern-looking woman named Judge Patricia Rosenberg, read the charges. Richard was being charged with 1 count of theft, a Class 5 felony under Arizona Revised Statute Section 13-1802. He pleaded not guilty, and his attorney argued for release on his own recognizance, citing Richard's ties to the community and lack of prior criminal record. The prosecutor, a young man named David Chen, did not object strongly, and Richard was released with conditions that included staying away from my property and not serving in any official HOA capacity until the case was resolved. As Richard left the courtroom, he caught my eye. For a moment, I thought he might say something, but instead he just looked away quickly and hurried out with his attorney and wife trailing behind him. The case slowly wound its way through the system over the next few months. Discovery happened, where both sides exchanged evidence. My tracking data proved to be the key piece of evidence, showing definitively that my generator had been at Richard's house. There was also apparently some security camera footage from a neighbor's house that showed Richard's Mercedes driving past my house around 2 in the morning on the night of the theft, which seemed suspicious given that his house was in the opposite direction, and there was no reason for him to be in that area at that time. During this period, the HOA went into a state of chaos. Richard had been forced to step down as president, and the vice president, a woman named Denise Mitchell, took over temporarily. Denise was actually reasonable, one of those people who understood that HOA rules existed to maintain property values and community standards, not to make people's lives miserable. She called an emergency HOA meeting about 3 weeks after Richard's arrest, and I attended along with what seemed like half the neighborhood. The meeting was held at the community center, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that was usually used for resident events. Every chair was filled and people were standing along the walls. The energy in the room was electric, with multiple conversations happening simultaneously until Denise called for order. "I know everyone has questions and concerns," Denise began, standing at the front of the room with a microphone. "The board has been in consultation with our HOA attorney, and I want to be transparent about where things stand. Richard Pemberton has resigned from his position as president and from the board entirely. He's also facing criminal charges, as many of you know. The board is taking this matter very seriously." "What about all the fines he issued?" someone called out from the back. "Are those still valid?" "We're reviewing all fines and violations issued in the past year," Denise said. "If anyone believes they were unfairly fined or that a violation notice was issued incorrectly, you can submit an appeal to the board for review. We want to make sure everything was handled properly." I raised my hand, and Denise nodded at me. "I just want to say that I appreciate the board taking this seriously. This whole situation has been pretty stressful, but it's good to see that there's accountability." There was actually a smattering of applause from some of the other residents, which felt both good and weird at the same time. The meeting continued for another hour, with various residents voicing their concerns and the board members trying to address them. It became clear that Richard had created a lot of resentment during his tenure, and people were eager for a fresh start. An election for a new president was scheduled for 2 months out, and several people indicated they planned to run. Meanwhile, my generator sat safely in my locked shed, doing exactly what I had bought it for when monsoon season hit again in July and knocked out power for 6 hours during a particularly bad storm. Being able to keep my house cool and comfortable for Sarah and Emma, while the rest of the neighborhood sweltered, felt like a small victory. The criminal case against Richard moved toward a resolution in August. Detective Kowalski called me to let me know that Richard's attorney had reached out to the prosecutor about a plea deal. Richard was willing to plead guilty to a reduced charge of misdemeanor theft in exchange for probation, restitution, and community service. How do you feel about that? Detective Kowalski asked me. I thought about it for a moment. Part of me wanted to see Richard face the full felony charge, to have a permanent mark on his record that matched the severity of what he had done. But another part of me just wanted this whole thing to be over. The stress of the case hanging over everything had been exhausting, and the thought of potentially having to testify at trial was not appealing. I want my money back for any costs I incurred because of this, I said. I had to take time off work for the police reports and the statement and all of that, and I think he should have to admit publicly what he did. I'll pass that along to the prosecutor, she said. The plea hearing happened on a Wednesday morning in late August. This time I definitely attended, wanting to see how it all ended. The courtroom was less crowded than the arraignment had been. Richard stood before Judge Rosenberg again, and his attorney presented the plea agreement. Mr. Pemberton, do you understand that by pleading guilty to misdemeanor theft, you are admitting that you unlawfully took property belonging to Trevor Caldwell? Judge Rosenberg asked. Yes, Your Honor, Richard said quietly. And do you understand the terms of your sentence? 2 years of supervised probation, 200 hours of community service, and restitution to Mr. Caldwell in the amount of $1,200 for costs and time lost. Yes, Your Honor. Is there anything you'd like to say to the court before I accept this plea? Richard was silent for a moment, then turned to look back at where I was sitting in the gallery. I want to apologize to Mr. Caldwell. What I did was wrong. I made a terrible mistake, and I'm prepared to accept the consequences. I'm sorry for the trouble I've caused him and his family. It was not exactly the most heartfelt apology I had ever heard, and I suspected it had been crafted carefully by his attorney, but at least he had said it publicly. Judge Rosenberg accepted the plea and entered the conviction. Richard was now a convicted thief, even if it was only a misdemeanor. For someone who had built his reputation on being a stickler for rules and community standards, having a criminal record was probably devastating. After the hearing, Prosecutor Chen approached me in the hallway. "Thank you for your cooperation throughout this case," he said. "That GPS tracker really made all the difference. Without that, this would have been much harder to prove." "I'm just glad it's over," I said honestly. "You should receive the restitution payments within the next few weeks," he told me. "If you have any problems, let us know." I walked out of the courthouse into the blazing Arizona sun, feeling like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The case was done. Richard had been held accountable. My generator was safe. Life could go back to normal, except, of course, that normal in an HOA is never quite that simple. About 2 weeks after the plea hearing, I received a letter in the mail from the HOA. My heart sank when I saw it, expecting another violation notice for some petty nonsense. But when I opened it, I was surprised to see it was actually a formal apology from the board. The letter explained that during their review of Richard's actions as president, They had discovered that he had been issuing violation notices and fines that were not actually supported by the HOA rules. Many of these had been essentially made up or were gross exaggerations of minor issues. The board was voiding dozens of fines, including all 3 of the ones I had received. They were also issuing refunds for fines that had already been paid. I received a check for $450, representing the 3 fines I had paid to avoid having liens placed on my house. It was not life-changing money, but it felt like justice. The HOA election happened in September, and Denise Mitchell ran for president on a platform of reasonable enforcement and community engagement rather than arbitrary rule enforcement. She won by a landslide. One of her first acts as the officially elected president was to revise the HOA violation process to include an automatic review by the full board before any fine was issued, preventing any single person from having the kind of unchecked power Richard had wielded. Life in Sunset Ridge gradually returned to normal, or at least a new version of normal. Richard and Patricia still lived in the neighborhood, but they kept a low profile. I would occasionally see Richard in his yard or getting into his Mercedes, but we never spoke. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that his real estate business had taken a significant hit after his conviction, with several clients dropping him, and his firm quietly reassigning him to a less visible role. I also heard that the financial situation Sarah had speculated about was indeed part of the story. Apparently, Richard had been living well beyond his means for years, keeping up appearances while drowning in debt. He had seen my generator sitting out, expensive and unguarded, and had made a stupid, impulsive decision that cost him dearly. I almost felt bad for him, but then I remembered all the petty fines and the stress of finding my property stolen, and the sympathy faded. The restitution payments came through as promised, direct deposits that showed up in my bank account over the course of several months. I used the money to buy a better security system for my house, including cameras that covered my entire property. I was not taking any chances on losing anything else. Emma's first birthday came in October, and we threw a party in our backyard. Several neighbors came, including Martin with his kids who played basketball in the driveway with the hoop that Richard had once tried to fine him for. Jennifer brought a casserole and spent half the party telling everyone who would listen about how relieved she was to have Denise as HOA president instead of Richard. As I stood in my backyard, watching Emma smash her face into a birthday cake while my neighbors laughed and chatted, I reflected on the whole bizarre experience. It had started with simple theft, my generator disappearing in the night. But that one act had unraveled so much more, exposing the corruption and petness that had been hiding behind the facade of community standards and HOA rules. The GPS tracker had been a $40 device I had installed mostly as a precaution, never really expecting to use it. But that small piece of technology had led the police directly to Richard's garage, had provided irrefutable evidence of his guilt, and had ultimately brought justice not just for me, but for the entire neighborhood that had been suffering under his authoritarian rule. There was something satisfying about the way it had all played out. Richard had spent years using his position to make other people's lives difficult, hiding behind rules and regulations to exercise petty power. And in the end, he had been brought down by his own criminal behavior and a simple GPS tracker that he had no idea existed. The community service portion of Richard's sentence was apparently being served at a local food bank, where he had to spend his Saturdays sorting donations and loading trucks. I heard this from Denise, who had heard it from someone who volunteered at the same location. There was a certain poetic justice to seeing someone who had been so concerned with maintaining the appearance of a perfect neighborhood, spending his weekends doing actual community service, rather than just posturing about community standards. The probation would last 2 years, meaning Richard had to regularly check in with a probation officer and could face serious consequences if he violated any terms. It was not prison, but it was a constant reminder of what he had done. As autumn turned to winter, and the brutal Arizona heat finally gave way to more pleasant temperatures, I found myself genuinely appreciating my neighborhood in a way I had not before. With Denise at the helm, the HOA functioned the way it was supposed to, maintaining common areas and addressing legitimate concerns without the constant threat of arbitrary fines and harassment. My generator sat in the shed, ready for the next power outage, but otherwise unused. Every time I saw it, I thought about that morning when I had discovered it missing, the anger and violation I had felt. But I also thought about how that GPS tracker had changed everything, how a simple precaution had led to accountability and justice. Sarah and I talked about the whole experience one evening while Emma slept. We were sitting on our back patio, enjoying the cool December air and watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. "You think Richard actually learned anything from this?" Sarah asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe. Or maybe he's just bitter about getting caught. Either way, he's not in a position to abuse power anymore, and that's what matters. It's crazy how one stolen generator changed everything for this whole neighborhood," she said. "It is," I agreed. "But I think it was bound to happen eventually. Richard was on a path that was always going to end badly. I just happened to be the catalyst." The next HOA meeting in January was remarkably calm compared to the dramatic emergency meeting 9 months earlier. Denise presented the budget, discussed some upcoming maintenance on the community playground, and addressed a few minor concerns from residents. There were no dramatic confrontations, no angry speeches, no power trips. It was boring in the best possible way. I left that meeting feeling grateful that I lived in a community where people were willing to hold their leaders accountable, where justice could prevail even in something as mundane as an HOA dispute. The whole experience had been stressful and frustrating, but it had also been a reminder that systems only work when people are willing to stand up against abuse and corruption. My generator remained in the locked shed, the GPS tracker still active, still sending its location signal to my phone every few minutes. I checked it occasionally, just to confirm it was still where it should be. That simple blue dot on the map had become a symbol of security for me, a reminder that even when people tried to take what was mine, technology and justice could prevail. Richard's Mercedes disappeared from the neighborhood in February. I heard from Denise that he and Patricia had sold their house and moved to Scottsdale, wanting a fresh start away from the neighborhood where everyone knew about his conviction. The house sold quickly despite everything, and a young couple with twin toddlers moved in. They seemed nice, and they definitely had no idea about the drama involving the previous owners. The final restitution payment arrived in March, exactly 6 months after the plea hearing. With it came a letter from the probation department confirming that Richard had completed his financial obligation. The community service would continue for several more months, but at least the monetary debt was paid. I took my family out to dinner with some of that restitution money, a small celebration of the end of this chapter. We went to our favorite Mexican restaurant in downtown Mesa, and Emma managed to eat about half a quesadilla before deciding it was more fun to throw it on the floor. It was perfectly mundane and perfectly wonderful. As we drove home that night, passing through our neighborhood with its uniform houses and perfectly maintained common areas, I realized that the whole experience had changed my perspective on community living. HOAs existed for good reasons, to maintain property values and create pleasant neighborhoods. But they were only as good as the people running them, and unchecked power could corrupt even something as seemingly benign as a homeowners association. The lesson I had learned was about vigilance, both in protecting my property with things like GPS trackers and in staying engaged with the governance of my community. Richard had been able to abuse his power for years because most people, myself included, had not been paying attention. We had just accepted the violation notices and paid the fines, grumbling but not actually organizing to change anything. It had taken a literal crime to spark real change, but that change had been possible because people were willing to show up, speak up, and demand accountability. The packed emergency meeting, the election that brought Denise to power, the reforms to the violation process, all of it had happened because residents decided to engage rather than just accept the status quo. Spring arrived in Arizona, which meant temperatures climbing back toward triple digits and our lawn requiring constant attention to stay green. I was out front watering one Saturday morning when Martin walked by with his kids. "Hey, Trevor," he called out. "You hear about Richard? What about him?" I asked, turning off the hose. "Apparently he violated his probation," Martin said with barely concealed satisfaction. "Got caught lying to his probation officer about his community service hours. He tried to claim he had done more than he actually had." "You're kidding," I said, though I probably should not have been surprised. Richard had proven he was willing to lie and cheat, so trying to shortcut his punishment seemed consistent with his character. "Nope. He's got a hearing next month. Could end up with jail time if the judge decides his probation violation was serious enough." I shook my head. "Some people never learn." "Speaking of learning," Martin said, "I'm thinking about getting one of those GPS trackers for my tools. After what happened with you, seems like a smart investment." "What brand did you use?" I told him about the tracker I had installed, and we ended up having a long conversation about home security and property protection. It turned out several neighbors had upgraded their security systems after my generator theft, with multiple people installing cameras and tracking devices on expensive equipment. In a weird way, Richard's crime had made the whole neighborhood more security conscious, which probably meant fewer thefts overall. It was an unintended positive outcome from a negative experience. The probation violation hearing happened in May, and this time I did not attend. I had moved on with my life, and I did not feel the need to watch Richard face consequences for yet another bad decision. I heard about the outcome from Denise, though. The judge had not been pleased with Richard's dishonesty, and had extended his probation by another year, and added an additional 100 hours of community service. Summer came around again, marking roughly a year since the whole incident had started. Monsoon season brought the expected power outages, and my generator performed perfectly, keeping my house comfortable while the rest of the neighborhood dealt with the heat. Several neighbors who had experienced that outage with us the previous year commented that they had gone out and bought their own generators, not wanting to suffer through another Arizona summer without backup power. Emma's second birthday party in October was even bigger than her first, with more neighbors attending and a general sense of community that had been absent during Richard's reign. People actually seemed to enjoy living in Sunset Ridge now, rather than just tolerating it. I never saw Richard again after he moved away. His name came up occasionally in neighborhood conversations, usually as a cautionary tale or a reference point when discussing HOA policies. "Remember when Richard tried to fine people for that?" Became a common phrase, usually followed by laughter or head shaking. The GPS tracker remained installed on my generator, a silent guardian that had proven its worth beyond any doubt. I never moved the generator outside of my locked shed again, having learned that lesson the hard way. The $40 I had spent on that tracker had saved me far more than the cost of the generator itself. It had brought justice, sparked community change, and given me peace of mind. As I sit here now, looking back on everything that happened, I realize that the story of my stolen generator is really a story about accountability and justice in unexpected places. It started with a simple theft, a crime of opportunity by someone who thought he was above consequences. But that GPS tracker, that small piece of technology, became the thread that unraveled everything. Richard Pemberton had spent years hiding behind his position as HOA president, using rules and regulations as weapons against his neighbors while considering himself untouchable. He saw my generator sitting outside, expensive and apparently unguarded, and he made a choice. He thought he could take it without consequences, that he could add it to his garage alongside all his other possessions, and no one would ever know. But he did not know about the tracker. He did not know that every moment that generator sat in his garage, it was sending signals to satellites overhead, recording its location with precision. He did not know that his crime would lead police directly to his door, that the evidence would be irrefutable, that his reputation and position would crumble. The truth is, Richard probably could have gotten away with it if I had not installed that tracker. Without it, the police would have taken a report, I would have filed an insurance claim, and the generator would have eventually been sold off somewhere with no one ever knowing what happened. Richard would have continued his reign as HOA president, continued issuing petty fines and violation notices, continued abusing his position. Instead, that tracker led to his arrest, his conviction, his resignation from the HOA, the damage to his business, his move away from the neighborhood, and ultimately his probation violation and extended sentence. One small device, one good decision on my part to protect my property, and everything changed. The neighborhood changed too. With Denise as president and new policies in place, the HOA actually functions the way it should. Common areas are maintained, legitimate issues are addressed, and residents are treated with respect rather than harassment. The toxic culture Richard had created is gone, replaced by something healthier and more functional. I think about alternate timelines sometimes, about what would have happened if I had not installed that tracker. Would Richard have stolen other things from other neighbors? Would he have continued escalating his abuse of power? How long would it have taken for something else to finally expose him? But in this timeline, the one that actually happened, a stolen generator and a GPS tracker led to accountability. It is a small story in the grand scheme of things, just one man's experience with theft and justice in a suburban Arizona neighborhood. But it mattered to me, and it mattered to my neighbors who had been suffering under Richard's rule. The generator still sits in my shed, ready for the next power outage. The tracker still sends its signal, that blue dot on my phone confirming that my property is exactly where it should be. Every time I check it, I am reminded of that morning when I discovered the theft, the anger I felt, and the satisfaction of watching justice unfold. Richard Pemberton stole my generator, but he did not know it had a tracker that would lead police directly to his garage. That one fact, that one piece of missing information, changed everything. It brought down a petty tyrant, reformed a broken HOA system, and reminded an entire community that accountability matters, even in the smallest aspects of life. And that, ultimately, is the lesson I take from this experience. Technology can be a force for justice. Vigilance matters. Communities can change when people are willing to stand up. And sometimes, karma is real and it comes with GPS coordinates leading directly to a crime scene. The generator hums to life whenever the power goes out, doing its job exactly as designed. But for me, it represents something more now. It is a reminder that doing the right thing, taking simple precautions, and demanding accountability can make a real difference. One stolen generator, one GPS tracker, one arrest, and everything changed. I sometimes wonder if Richard thinks about that night when he decided to steal my generator. Does he regret it? Does he understand how one impulsive decision destroyed so much of what he had built? Or does he just feel bitter about getting caught, angry at the technology that exposed him rather than the actions that led to his downfall? I will probably never know, and honestly, it does not matter. What matters is that justice was served, the community improved, and my generator is safely locked away, still silently broadcasting its location to the satellites overhead. That blue dot on my phone is more than just a location marker. It is a symbol of security, accountability, and the power of being prepared. The story has a closed ending because Richard was held accountable, the HOA was reformed, and life moved on. Justice was not perfect. He avoided felony charges and jail time through a plea deal, but there were real consequences. His reputation was damaged, his business suffered, his position was lost, and he gained a criminal record and extended probation through his own continued poor choices. For me and my family, life is better now than it was before all this happened. Our neighborhood is more pleasant without Richard's tyrannical rule. Emma is growing up in a community that functions properly. And I have peace of mind knowing that my property is protected not just by locks, but by technology that proved its worth beyond measure. The generator theft that happened over 2 years ago is now just a story I tell at neighborhood gatherings, a tale of karma and justice that people enjoy hearing. But it was real, and it mattered, and the changes it sparked continue to benefit everyone who lives in Sunset Ridge. Richard Pemberton stole my generator, but he did not know about the tracker. That tracker led police to his garage, and his garage led to consequences that rippled out far beyond a simple theft. One crime, one piece of technology, one arrest, and an entire community was changed for the better. That is the power of accountability, the importance of justice, and the value of a $40 GPS tracker that turned out to be worth its weight in gold.